trial recording.
Okay, I think we've got it. Super. Hello, everyone. I'm Kenric, and Stephen Wittenstall and I are going to lead a discussion on the age of Voltaire that we're moving towards and how that's framed under the CIP 1694. What we're hoping to get out of the session is to work as a community to get ourselves more informed about the changes that are planned for self-governance of the Cardano network. And there's two aspects of this. We're going to play a video that Stephen has just put together that overviews the proposal. And then part of what I'm hoping to get out of this is to be better prepared for a workshop that I'm attending in Colorado later in the month. And wanted to understand sort of the community's perspective on the CIP 1694 proposal as part of that. So, Stephen, would you like to start us off showing your video?
I'm going to share it. It may be slow, but let's have a go.
All right, super. I do think we're missing the audio. I heard that from someone else on chat. Not sure why that is. We don't seem to have the audio, Steve.
Okay, let's have a look. I think share sound. Let's try that. As I recall,
Cardano is a block.
How about then?
That's better.
Platform
Okay.
and cryptocurrency
Just turn it up a little.
developed to provide a more secure and sustainable infrastructure.
I'm gonna have that, you know.
All right, I'm going to ask who touched the buttons? Who had the fat fingers when they were
that's because we forget to mention this. We did this all the time. No,
but you know what's different today from the other times? You are keeping co-host. You're rusty, probably. I'm just kidding.
You know what, guys? I think it was me. I was trying to leave. I hit the wrong button.
You're muted, Kenric.
And we're back after a little interruption there. So I don't think I'll redo the introduction. And Stephen, I think everyone's back, it looks like. So would you like to try again with your video?
Yeah, sure, let's go. I'll just check again. Is that sound? Can you hear the sound? No, okay, I have to do that again. Okay, let's try again.
Chain platform and cryptocurrency
Very good.
that was developed to provide a more secure and sustainable infrastructure, decentralized applications and digital assets. It is based on the proof-of-stake consensus algorithm and utilizes smart contracts, which allows developers to build decentralized applications on the platform. The Voltaire era of Cardano aims to make the network self-sustaining by adding a voting and a treasury system. This will allow network participants to use their stake and voting rights to shape the future development of the network. In order to achieve these ends of greater decentralization and sustainability, Input-Output Global has drafted a Cardano improvement proposal, CIP 1694, that outlines an on-chain decentralized governance mechanism for Voltaire. This presentation by Quality Assurance DAO, QADAO, is a summary of CIP 1694. QADAO is a community organization that provides the following services: documentation and communication, auditing and oversight, governance and community support, facilitation and co-production, and project management and automation. You can support our work by delegating to our Cardano Stakepool, QADAO, subscribing to our YouTube channel, and following us on Twitter for the latest announcements. In November 2022, a CUADAO improvement proposal, a CIP, entitled An On-Chain Decentralized Governance Mechanism for Voltaire, was submitted to the CUADAO Foundation's CIP's GitHub repository. From the outset, community feedback has been sought and encouraged by both IOG and the CUADAO Foundation on the Voltaire CIP. What is a CUADAO improvement proposal? A CIP is a formalized design document for the CUADAO community and the name of the process by which such documents are produced and listed. The CIP process itself was defined and agreed in CIP 1. What is CIP 1694? In summary, the abstract for 1694 proposes a revision of CUADAO's existing governance, the blockchain. 2 new fields would be added to on-chain transactions, governance actions and votes. Any CUADAO user will be allowed to submit a governance action, which will then be ratified by a constitutional committee, delegated representatives, DREPs, and stakepool operators, SPOs. The ratified actions will then be enforced on the blockchain through a set of rules. ADA holders can register as DREPs or SPOs to either represent themselves or to delegate their vote, with the voting rights based on the amount of ADA they hold. The specification. The current specification draft, as of February 2023, documents the following: the Constitution, a brief outline of intent, and the Constitutional Committee, an overview of the combined governance group and its remit. Governance actions, the different types of on-chain events that are governance actions. These include a motion of no confidence, new constitutional committees and or quorum size, updates to the Constitution, hard fork initiation, protocol parameter changes, and treasury withdrawals. Votes, detail of a vote transaction, the life cycle of on-chain governance states and epoch boundaries. Delegated representatives, DREPs, which provides detail on DREP registration and retirement certificates, and a vote delegation certificate, a new stake distribution for DREPs, and changes to the existing ledger rules. What motivated this CIP? The motivation behind CIP 1694 is to address shortcomings in the existing CUADAO governance mechanism, which modifies parameter values, including hard forks, and transfers ADA between reserves and the Treasury. These shortcomings include no room for active participation of ADA holders, transfers from Treasury can be hard to track and lack transparency, hard forks are not sufficiently differentiated from other protocol changes, and there's no clearly defined common vision or guiding principles. But what next? Discussion and review of the specification is encouraged across the CUADAO community in order to inform appropriate revisions to this governance model. QADAO supports this objective by contribution to the broad communication and explanation of the specification with this summary and subsequent presentations. Full documentation of this presentation is also available on QADAO's Express Skipbook. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. That was really terrific. And Stephen is putting a whole series of both slides and videos together, and the subsequent ones will go into more depth. What I thought maybe as a good structure for the discussion, there's kind of 3 elements of this proposal: the stake pool operators, the DREPs, and the constitutional committee. I thought maybe we take just a few minutes, maybe not a lot of time, just to talk about the stake pool operator's role. That might be what people are the most familiar with. And then why don't we talk about DREPs, which people have been learning about. And probably where there's the greatest amount of uncertainty still is in the constitutional committee. But why don't we do that once we've got some flow in the discussion. So just, I'm curious, maybe as a start, are there any stake pool operators here as part of the discussion today? Any of you running a stake pool? And if so, it'd be great if you maybe chime in about your experience as a stake pool operator, and particularly the role you've played in the hard forks, and what your thoughts are about this particular proposal for the Age of Voltaire. Nori, do you want to start?
Sure. And yeah, thanks for this conversation. I think it's a really important one. And I am an SPO. And yeah, I have mixed feelings, kind of just thinking as an SPO, we're really focused on keeping our nodes up, helping decentralize the networks. And then there's kind of that secondary game of how do we gain enough delegation to be able to pay for all the hardware and bandwidth and electricity and everything, and make it kind of a sustainable operation. And now this SIP brings in a layer of governance responsibility that I'm not sure if SPOs are ready for that, or if many of them will welcome that additional responsibility. And far now, the SPO community is pretty fragmented, and we don't have a common and there's not rules that govern all of this. We also probably need to deeply think, how do we as SPOs come together? So yeah, those are kind of my initial thoughts there.
That's
it's
an
a new
interesting-
thing, and it's going to bring up some stuff.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because you typically think about the additional authority that maybe this process would give the groups like the SPOs. But of course, with any responsibility also comes the cost of that responsibility. So that is an interesting perspective. Thank you. Einstein, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I run staking pool Ada Nord Pool since the ITN. I will add to what Nori said, like, I agree there's some fragmentation, but we see there are a few groups or membership-based organizations forming. You have the single pool stake pool alliance, you have the ISPA, the inter-staking pool pairing agreement, you have the guild that produce a lot of the toolings many of the staking pool operators use. So I think it's a mixed thing, but if you tally up all the 3,000 pools, we definitely are not there that we have most people, most staking pool operators in membership organizations yet. So I think that we have a long way to go there, and to make material available for all the SPOs so they can engage in this. And the second part that Nori brings up is like, are the SPOs ready for this or want to take this responsibility? I can definitely say there is a group of SPOs who do care a lot about the network health. It's not just a block for us, it's more than that. And you have seen this, for example, when we held back on the upgrade. And actually, it was a majority of the SPOs held back on upgrade. And I personally witnessed that one of the SPOs found a bug that if we have not held back, it would have had quite serious implications for the network health. So I think the answer to that is both. It's maybe we're not fully ready, but I think there's also many who are eager to pick up the mantle on this. So that's my experience I can share, at least.
Yeah, and a question comes to mind. So to date, the hard forks are a pretty big change, and that involves upgrading of the code, and that's kind of how you vote, is upgrading of the code. But it occurs to me that in this governance process, there's probably some other mechanism in which the SPOs will register their vote. Have you all been engaged in discussions about that?
Not to the detail level that we need to have, and I really welcome these type of workshops. I'm also going to the event in Colorado, so
Okay.
I'm really looking forward to a deep dive in this myself. But I think you bring up a very good point, and I would just like to point out that even if we build a voting system on top, every SPO can still choose to upgrade or not. Like this voting system needs to also account for that, the fact that you can still, as an SPO, hold back. So we need to make a system that gives the confidence and really makes the SPOs want to adopt this system.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Einstein. Shrimple Solutions? Would you like
Hi,
to go
can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Sorry about that. My mic setup's dreadful. I just want to build on what Magnus and Nori said. I mean, I think the proposal that's been tabled is actually deeply flawed. It effectively creates a slow-moving pseudo-decentralized system of soft to radical top-down governance because the proposed system makes it incredibly difficult for the community to replace the constitutional committee if it's not performing well or is not acting in the best interest of the network. Now, this is because the process for replacing the committee is just arbitrarily complex. And in addition, the size of quorum requirements of the committee can change each time it's replaced, which makes it difficult for the community to predict or understand how the committee will operate. It also can be difficult to understand how an action will be ratified or which actions will be enacted or dropped. So just to give an overview, a systematic flaw is the ratification requirements of different governance options are arbitrarily complex. Different actions require different combinations of approval. Let me simplify it even more for you. Different actions require different combinations of approval from the Constitutional Committee, DREPs, and SPO, and each have different thresholds. So the percentage of active voting stake and stake held by stake pools that must be met for the action to be ratified, right? So and also, obviously, the fallback conditions aren't clear. It can be challenging for community members to keep track of these requirements as well. And if they can't understand governance, it's going to be incredibly difficult to get them to participate in governance, which will dramatically reduce, participation, which is a bad thing for governance.
So these are interesting comments, but I'm not clear what you mean by it being overly complex. It's certainly true that any voting system, any community decision-making involves some complexity, but what is it about? And also, a lot of these parameters are still in the process of being defined.
Of course. So I return the question to you
about the current sort of draft plan that you find to be too complex for the problem it's trying to solve?
Sure, I'll demonstrate it. Kenric, I've never heard of Cardano before, but I want to take part in governance. Can you explain how the system works? In a sentence?
Well,
exactly. So that's
yeah. So I guess, okay. So that's one, you raise an interesting point. I come from the field of complex systems, and one of the things that's very important in that is the idea of making sure that your solutions don't overfit a problem, because when you overfit, you end up in a sense not having a good model of the real problem. And not so
that's the project.
But I'm not, I guess I'm not, I didn't strike me, and again, Stevens did provide an overview, but
you haven't been able to explain.
I think maybe what I'll do next is actually recap that and then move on to the next part of this. But so one thing that's clear in the initial proposal is that there's 3 different bodies that are going to contribute to the decision making. So one is the SPOs, and I know we didn't get to everyone, but Lee, maybe you can speak in the next rounds. And then why don't we talk next about the DREP role, and then we'll also take some time to talk about the constitutional.
Sure, Kenric. Like that's where the poor incentive structure is. The proposal mentions that DREPs need to be compensated for their work, but it's not clear on what will be done or what exact mechanisms will compensate them for that work. It fails to leverage the existing incentive structure of the Cardano blockchain, like stake pool operators get paid ADA for decentralizing the network. Now, this DREP system doesn't have an incentive model built into it, so that's another problem that's manifest in this particular version of.
All right, well, let's segue to this, and let's bring some other
if you
people.
can explain how it works,
if I may comment briefly, Kenric.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it is a lot to take in, and I think it's going to be a challenge for IOG to communicate this in a succinct way, but I think there are some possibilities there, because in essence it is a governance action transaction backed by a stake on the chain. That's it. Now, yes, there's more to it than that, but there are possibilities here for more brief and succinct messaging. Also, I take your point, I'd also preface everything that this is a draft specification. It has big gaps in it, and actually, Gerard, I'm actually going to try and do a summary video on the GitHub commentary, which is very worth reading, because there's a lot of to and fro there, because it's still being worked out. And incentive mechanism, for example, is being thrashed out as well. That is definitely a gap, and that is recognised. So I just want to say that. So over to you, Kenric.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so now as we talk about DREPs, so one thing in reading through the proposal is that there's going to be two distinct DREPs. So a lot of us have learned about the DREPs program through the role that's going to play starting in Fund 10 for voting on catalyst proposals, where you'll have the choice now to either vote yourself or to delegate your vote to a DREP. The DREPs that's described in this Voltaire governance is actually going to be a distinct group of people that will be responsible for making decisions about upgrades and changes to the network itself. So although it has the same title, it's actually two different groups. And maybe in the same vein, is there anyone in the group that is planning to be a Catalyst DREP and has participated in those workshops? And what's your impression so far of what you've learned about that program? Has anyone here signed up to be a DREP? Yeah, we have some overlap. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm bringing some other people into the discussion. So Zoe, maybe you could go first.
I would love to let Einstein go first.
Yeah, but he went during the SPO thing, so you know I don't want to take too long with the whole discussion. So why don't you go ahead, Zoe?
No. Hey, I actually don't fully remember the question, and I was kind of prepared to listen to Einstein because I know he signed up as a DREP in Catalyst and has done more homework on the SIP than me.
Very good. Einstein, go ahead.
Sorry, Selena, please go and talk as well. I will be short. One of the things, my impression from the SIP is like, I'm worried about this deposit DREPs we'll have to make. Would this perhaps be technically feasible that you could have many people together form like a pool that this person, we want to have him as our DREP? Because I'm feeling it could exclude some groups and some very talented people who could become DREPs if we allow this deposit to be very large. But I also understand the problem that if we don't have a deposit, we could have too many DREPs for basically the blockchain to handle if it's too much traffic, if you have millions. So that was I want to just bring one key point. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And Vanessa, would you like to go?
Yeah, I'm not registered to be a DREP, but I have documented the meetings that there's been extensively. And one thing that strikes me is how many safeguards there are for the Catalyst DREPs, you know, and how many limits and how many things there are in place to make sure that, you know, governance is safe and that it doesn't actually produce a Sybil attack or any kind of problematic thing. Obviously, at this stage, we don't see that in the way that the DREPs for 1694 have been sort of explained and set out. I'm going to be really interested to see what safeguards are put in place to make sure that we don't get, you know, effectively as it stands at the moment, you could have the whole electorate delegating to one DREP. There's nothing to say that couldn't happen at the moment. So I'm just, and I know it's because we're not at the stage where that has happened yet, where that's been worked out yet, but I'm just interested if the safeguards are going to be different or the same. I
mean, that's an interesting question. You know, the proposal, as Stephen said, is just a draft. And it seems to me there may even have to be sub-proposals for all the different components of how this is going to work. Because governance is a gigantic problem for a community as large as this. But you know, my assumption, but that this will be a good assumption to test and check on, is that they'll be following some of the design principles that went into the Catalyst DREP program. And thank you, Vanessa. That's great. Zoe, do you want to go now?
Okay. Would you mind repeating the initial question?
Well, the topic now is the DREP. So I initiated it by requesting if anyone had signed up to be a DREP. But why don't we take some time to look at it from the point of view of voters who are delegating? And with regard to what you've learned about the DREPs program so far, what do you like about it and what are you concerned about?
Okay. In terms of concern, I feel like theorizing about it opens a lot of questions. And I also recognized, I don't know, that each implementation of technical nature also implies questions of other nature. And I feel like that's that makes it more complex in a way that you can discuss anything and it might change anyway. And that basically makes me kind of predict that this CIP will really take quite some time and stuff. And yeah, I mean, sometimes it's really minor stuff, like for catalyst DREPs now, there was some stuff about when a DREP is saturated, the profile will not show up anymore. And for me, this has huge implications on so much, but it's just some random minor detail. So yeah, I feel like I didn't make my mind up about everything like very thoroughly because it feels impossible to do so. And I also wonder about the Cardano DREPs. I kind of wonder what the different entities will be in the end. I initially assumed that IOG, Emergor, and CF will stay those 3 entities, and the MBO will be an additional one. DREPs will be an additional one, and SPO are an additional one, but apparently it's not like just like that. So that confused me a bit.
Yeah, why don't I'm planning to get to that next. So why don't we let's defer that part of it. But thank you for that input, Zoe. And Tommy, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. Yeah, I've taken both of the courses and I've signed up as a DREP, and I've been contacted by a Fund 9 prop. I think they're starting to do interviews for DREPs so we can get our stance and I guess what our background and everything else is. So they're going to be doing interviews and I assume posting them on wherever that is, YouTube. My feeling, so I think we need to make this like the cartoons. I think we got to call these DC reps, delegated Cardano reps, and the other ones D reps, so we can stop the confusion. So from now on, Catalyst, I'm just going to call them DC reps if everybody can hang with me on that one, and then we know what we're talking about a little bit.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead.
Well, these are. I agree that right now the overlap in the names will probably be confusing. So I guess for the moment, Catalyst DREPs versus Cardano DREPs is not too bad, but maybe they'll come up with something else.
Well, I'm going with DC reps right now. So my thing is we have to take it out of being a popularity contest because it's not stake pool operators, it's individual Catalyst members like myself and whomever else decides to run for this. So I don't think it should be a popularity, but I think it should be based on experience, maybe education, whatever it is, technical knowledge. Accountability, I think, is going to be key. And there's going to be some identity things like I may not necessarily, I have to disclose how much voting power I have, but I may not want to disclose all my bags. So, I may just have one wallet that as a DC rep I can vote out of, and whatever the delegated power for people that choose to align themselves with me. So that's one privacy issue. And I think I applaud this initiative from Fund 9 to do some type of background check or interviews with all the DC rep candidates.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
You know, so that I think that's cool.
So in
and I
other
think-
words, this is actually a catalyst proposal that a group is going to interview the proposed DREPs. Okay, that's interesting. Now,
Yeah.
how are they handling? Because one of the things that's again reiterated in this new proposal is they're saying that DREPs are not required to identify themselves completely. In other words, they may use some kind of virtual identity like a DIDS rather than a full public identity. Now,
You're not talking about DC reps, you're talking about D reps now.
well, I'm asking a question whether that affects both of these. And does anyone know what the expectations were in terms of identity to register as a DREP? Both. Well, let's start with the Catalyst one that's, you know, underway. Okay, yeah. So Dan, thanks. Danny is clarifying that for the Catalyst, there was an expectation of full identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess part of that is that while we're making a lot of progress towards DIDS capability, that's not necessarily in active use yet. There's a lot of prototyping going on. But I did find it interesting that this proposal does specifically state that they're planning to allow DREPs to be have some protection of their identity. Okay, very good. Let me introduce the next segment of this, and I think this is where there's the most uncertainty in terms of what the plans are, and it's not, and the proposal doesn't clarify this very much yet. So just backing up, from the beginning of the Shelley age, and I don't remember which age we're in right now, but we're still under this governance structure. It's a federation, and the federation is Input Output Global, the Cardano Foundation, and Emergo. And the way it was set up is there were 7 keys distributed. Two went to the Cardano Foundation, 2 went to Emergo, and 3 went to IOG. And for those that are interested, with Steve and the QADAO team and staff from Mathematica, we put a white paper together that we published in September, that you can learn more about the voting processes for, ultimately, we're working towards being able to analyze the DREP process. But one of the ones we looked at was that federation of 7 keys, and there were some interesting insights in that. Now, what they've communicated thus far is that, the point of Voltaire is to move away from the federation towards a broader decentralized governance, and that the SPOs and the DREPs are intended to be the core of that, but at the very least, as an intermediate step, there's going to be a constitutional committee that, and they have not specified, to my knowledge, I'm be interested to hear what anyone knows, how that committee is going to be formed. But there is language in there to suggest that the original federation members will be part of that committee. But then it will expand beyond that to active members of the community. So what have people heard? What do people know about the Constitutional Committee? And what questions do people have? Anyone want to dive into this tougher topic? If there's no takers, maybe Stephen, do you want to dive in a little bit more in terms of what you've learned about the
You put me on the spot there, but yeah, the Constitutional Committee, right? Okay, what immediately comes to mind is there's some vagueness about this. From what I understand, there is stakeholders on the committee, and I understand that that is IOG and CF, and then who else is to be admitted on the committee is still left rather vague. It's like people with a commitment to QADAO, I don't know the exact wordings, or knowledge or capability. Now, how that's, I mean, one thing when I was reading the SIP, the impression I got was I was wondering whether members of the Constitutional Committee would be drawn from the DREPs that have been voted, or the SPOs. I mean, that's obviously an option, and obviously, people who are selected may also be a DREP of any kind, but that's not made clear either in the SIP. But again, this is a work in progress. Yeah. So the rationale for who should be on that committee, as far as I know, unless any IOG person that can supplement what I'm saying, it's not worked out completely.
Yeah. Okay. Einstein, did you have some thoughts on the Constitutional Committee?
Yeah, just a small detail from the SIP. It says it's going to be a membership-based organization initially, and in all likelihood, some of the founding entities will be part of it. So what I am hoping to see is the same that we saw during the gradual release for staking pool operators to have control over the blocks in the network with a D parameter. And hopefully we'll see the same with the Constitutional Committee gradually releasing the keys, so to speak, of this institution, and who will be part of it from the foundation members and gradually towards the community. But this is the part that definitely needs the most discussion, and that's most vague. I agree fully with that. But I think handing of power, that will be a very interesting topic going forward.
Yeah, right. Shrimple, do you have a comment on this?
Well, I think the consensus has kind of been coming back that it is quite complex, and there is a lot of work to be done. I think, together through all of our participation and contributions, we should be able to either find a way to make this SIP work, or if it does turn out that through testing and analysis that essentially this does create a system of tyrannical top-down governance from a small selected centralized group, then we maybe should consider alternative options.
Yeah, and one thing that strikes me in the way you're framing it, I'll re-emphasize, I think this is part of our introductions, that one of our principles as a community is to assume good intent. Now, that's not always the case, and part of the whole point of a block. Now, let me finish first. Part of the point of a blockchain is to actually develop stronger trust in our financial systems by not allowing individuals to be able to exploit it. That's the point. But it's true that we don't always achieve that. But I think unless you have stronger evidence, I would be hesitant to make those kinds of accusations.
Yeah, I would read the comments to the SIP in the GitHub commentary particularly the responses back from Gerard. And the intention there, to be fair, does seem to be an intent to implement a decentralized solution. Now, now with that comes all sorts of issues. Like, for example, I need to go away and analyze the thread, but there's certainly issues of identity, of and that kind of thing. So the complexity does need to be resolved by, simplifying the messaging, but also at the heart of the SIP is a kind of, the mathematics of the voting around the government actions, I'm thinking, Kenric. That kind of game theory presentation is also something that can be useful to communicate as well, because that would build trust in the kind of core of it.
Right. So one thing I'll add here too is that, as many of you know, our team has been focused on analyzing voting and decision processes, and that comes from my background in designing decision systems. And we've spent a lot of time advocating for the quadratic voting system, which, you know, I could see DREPs, for instance, being a platform for that. But actually, in my most recent work, I had an opportunity to meet John Buck at the QADAO Summit in Washington, D.C. And then after that, learn more about his work on sociocracy and how that was, he was actually a consultant to the QADAO Catalyst program early on. And, you know, the circle that we have and some of the ways that SWARM works as an organization kind of build from these principles of sociocracy, holacracy, and dynamic governance. And so I'm kind of curious if some of those principles might end up becoming part of the way this constitutional committee is set up. I'm not aware, there's nothing in the proposal that suggests that, but that's one of the questions I plan to bring up at the workshop. And as part of that part of the discussion, Nori and I are going to lead it after town hall next week on the principles of decision-making under what's called sociocracy, where groups use a consent-based decision-making process where anyone can propose something, but then everyone in the group is allowed to raise objections until the group comes to consent of the proposal being a positive step forward. So that's a kind of sort of side note of a discussion we're going to have next week to follow up on this, on different kinds of decision making. Dan, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, I must have raised my hand by accident.
Oh, okay.
I'm a little one at the moment. I'm just listening. Might chime in later. Thanks for discussing this, and hi everyone. Sorry.
Maybe a way to frame this, I'm curious if anyone's had some experience in either writing like a business vision or mission statement or other kinds of broader documents for a community that would be like a constitution. Does anyone have some experience with that, and you want to talk about your experiences in trying to develop either a constitution or a vision statement? Rocky, please go ahead.
Hey folks. Yeah, actually, I was part of a community values statement committee for my employer. So for anybody doesn't know, I worked in research, administration, compliance, and for our office in particular, we were trying to develop. This is sort of evolving, with the situation of COVID and social unrest and things like this going on, and there was an initiative to address the culture. Everybody was doing this anywhere in any sort of office environment. You probably had your own experience, but so I was asked to be on the community values statement committee. It was about 8 of us. It was a very unusual experience because it was, obviously talking about things that we don't normally address in the workplace, and just being very personal and such. So it was very daunting, but it was also, we approached it in a very sort of actively altruistic manner. So, we did have some sort of guidelines about how the conversations were to transpire, and how you should be communicating with one another. And, you have to be extremely receptive and sort of have a growth mindset, and sort of, all this sort of manner of engaging and allowing people to speak freely. and be heard. I think one of the
was there a particular process you used as either part of the discussions or part of the writing process for this statement?
You know, Kenric, I'm gonna actually, I will get to, I'm gonna look at some notes. This kind of discussion is obviously catching me a little bit off guard, but I'm definitely happy to share some. There's a lot to consider. I think that, you know, our compass was trying to, we actually did sort of incorporate a sprint model at a point because there was so much time trying to understand, like, you know, how to talk about these things. It was such a foreign thing, but I think, you know, what I'll say is one thing that when we were sort of done with it, and this took like 7 months of discussion, so it was not an easy thing, was that we did have a little bit of lament on being more incorporating, because it was, and this was me personally, I did voice this during discussion saying, you know, it does feel a little bit odd that we're making sort of this thing that represents everybody and represents all these values, but it's only being, you know, sort of created by a limited number of people and experiences. So I don't know if we were catching everybody's sort of purview of what they'd want to see.
Yeah,
right?
that's
So,
one of the challenges. Right?
Yeah. But, you know, I can get back to you again, like when I sort of can get back to my notes on that, because that was a very enriching experience, you know, and happy to share if I can.
Related to the constitution writing, technically we have many people here who had experience. I would assume a few from governance school, Stephen, Vanessa, Felix, and then probably Daniel and Chris also. So if you put people in the same room and have that discussion how to frame it, and I think a good output could come out of that. So what's your direction, or what, once we have the writers, or what did you imagine to do with that skill set?
Kenric, I think, sorry, Tim, thanks, Steve.
Go ahead.
I think, I mean, I'm just catching up with a lot of governance videos because I've sort of been out of the app picture for the past few months. But I think Charles referred to value discovery, and as a kind of, although value discovery, I think also Charles also sort of seemed to imply in one of his videos, I don't know which one, so I can't source it, that it's not a done deal, constitutionalism. This is a, by the way, philosophically, this is a constitutional system, so it's a form of contractualism, you know. So there is a point where it doesn't have to be that way, but you could view it as an experiment. So if you're going to, and this is how I tend to view it, it's actually okay. And this is part of the criticism I would have of CIP 1694, is to say that up front, is to say we're choosing this governance model, and this governance model is constitutionalism. Okay, it's a form of contractualism. That needs to be said, in my view, because it's a philosophical choice. Then flowing down from that, you have to decide, well, how are you going to put together a constitution? And of course, as we know from the world, and you know, different constitutions, different countries, different scales, there's very many different ways of doing that. And that comes back again to Charles's thing about value discovery. What does that mean? You know, so I think the opportunity in our decentralized environment is to you know, grasp the opportunity there, but for our community, not just in you know, to actually try and answer that question in our own way.
Yeah, and that's a thing we should emphasize, is that, you know, like other parts of Cardano and Catalyst, there's lots of ways to contribute and participate. So even if you're not a SPO or a DREP, the CIPs are all open processes, and you are encouraged to make comments, ask questions on GitHub, and to become part of the conversation of how that design is fleshed out. So for those of you that are particularly interested in governance, and particularly interested in the governance of Cardano, do take the initiative to participate. That can be an important step. So the I lost the thread of my thought. I was going to make another comment, but maybe I'll pause on that. Yeah, either, maybe either Felix or someone from the SWARM team could describe sort of the governing principles that they've used in order to form SWARM. And maybe that also can inform some of the processes that would work well in developing a constitution for CUDANO.
Honestly, I don't think that we can learn anything from SWARM there. That's not at all in the direction of a constitution. We're doing pretty much the opposite, I would say.
Okay, well, let's see the difference. I mean, that's maybe that's important to understand. What do you see as the difference then?
The difference is, I think, pretty much that, let's say, everything regarding the MBO constitutional committee, SPOs, and DREPs is heavily manifested in theory, right? And SWARM, not at all. It's much more about experimenting actually in the practice and creating theory out of the practice. And that's a problem which we have here as well, right? Because the only valid role on which we can actually look in the whole things are the SPOs. This is the only role which is already there. It's already active.
Yeah.
The DREPs are fully theoretical. The constitution and the constitution and the committee, which are totally different things, that even the committee itself is different, right? You have the initial committee, which is envisioned for the beginning, and it's mentioned already in the CIP that it's, well, the idea is to move this into even a new committee. And
yeah, so that's a good point. And one of the things is I was thinking about this week is that, as you're describing and others are commenting, at some level, the Constitutional Committee is sort of starting from the Federation and then expanding. And so, and it's a membership-based organization. So there can be a perception of that being maybe an elite group within the community and not being fully representative of the full community. And I wondered whether either SWARM or other groups in the CUDANO community might have some interest in kind of building bottom-up organization in terms of the way the CUDANO community makes decisions. And maybe that could be part of our discussion next week with these principles of dynamic governance. Any thoughts on that, either Felix or someone else?
I can jump in for a second again. I would say
Yeah,
definitely.
ahead, please.
I think one thing what is crucial and really important for anybody or any organisms are the tools, right? And I'm quite concerned when I look on the whole thing and say, hey, do we actually have effective tools for the whole thing? Are we able to build this fully? Let's say, for example, there's SWARM quite well good in it, to build a fully transparent public and visible treasury and accounting system, right? Where you can say, oh, okay, is it possible to display actions which are made in the community on the blockchain? And how could this look like? And to make sure that the stuff is public and transparent. And because this one thing which is not really a lot explained in the CIP yet as well, right? When it comes to accountability and auditability, who is making sure that people actually can oversee the whole thing? Even the committee.
That's well, in fact, as I've been learning about this process of dynamic governance, that to me seems like maybe what is maybe important about it is that if you have circles or committees that are interlocked, and each one of those has the ability to be making decisions by consent, then in a sense, anyone has the ability to raise an objection as long as they provide a strong argument about it, right? Rather than just either vetoing the process or creating noise, but actually putting an argument together of why a particular proposal might not help the community. And because it does seem to me that, and I'll pause there. Those are some interesting thoughts. Thank you. And Zoe, go ahead. You've had your hand raised for a bit.
Yeah, no worries. What do we or you understand under a constitution? How would you define a constitution?
That's a great question, and at this point, it's a blank sheet. I don't, there may very well be teams that have been working on that, but nothing's been published yet. So that's part of the questions that need to be raised is, as Steve's saying, do we want a constitution? And if so, what purpose would the constitution serve? And then what's the process for writing and developing and deciding what's going to be in the constitution? Those are all open questions that people in the community can start to participate in.
Yeah, and I also feel it's a bit nebulous with the whole value stuff. When I don't really understand, or I mean, I'm not an expert. I'm actually, yeah. How are values in a constitution? I mean, I'm not an American, so maybe you, how does that fit together?
Well, since you brought up the American Constitution, I can just frame that a little bit. The preamble to the Constitution does lay out values, and then the different articles of the Constitution that lay out an executive, legislative, and judicial branch are intended to provide a structure for fulfilling those values. So that's one approach. I'm sure there's other approaches, but one approach is to lay out sort of the values of the community. And then once you've defined those values, you then lay out the foundational structures that can fulfill those values.
And Kenric, can we all at least appreciate that while we might not agree fundamentally with some of America as a system, as a culture, all that kind of stuff, we do acknowledge that the American Constitution was the greatest experiment in the history of human governance, in so much as it resulted in a society that broke away from a tyrannical British government to create a self-sovereign nation, and that we should at least take inspiration from that historic event. Though, of course, it's fraught with problems, being a old time.
And I'm not
problems.
I don't want to steer us too strongly in that direction, because this is a very broad community, and that's only one model. And there's other
but it is the most successful model on the planet at the moment, and that's something to acknowledge.
That's a judgment statement.
Yeah, Kenric, if I can just provide some
financially
before we move on to Einstein and Roki and Zoe, if I can just provide some context here. But bear in mind also, this is something produced by a company and a foundation. The IOG have an IP which they're trying to hand over. They're trying to decentralize. So think of it in that context. This is not necessarily. There is a kind of middle ground here. There's like, the IOG has spent years researching, et cetera, developing the QADAO blockchain. So there is a transitionary period, and it's often what we're dealing with here is like also a bootstrapping problem. Okay, so it's like there's always going to be that transitionary period where who is setting the initial context, who's setting the ball rolling, before it goes over to a decentralized committee. Sorry, Einstein, I can't pass over to you or Zoe. First.
Yeah, and let me say this too. This is absolutely fantastic.
Kenric, and should that be the people or IOG? Einstein, I think he had his hand up.
Well, let me just make a comment first, because this is a fantastic discussion, and I see this, we'll probably need many of these discussions over the next year in progress. So I don't want to we're not going to accomplish everything today, and I don't want to go too long with the meeting. So why don't we take a few more comments from the people that have their hands raised, and then I'll close today's meeting, and we have a meeting set up for next week to talk about one particular governance process known as dynamic governance. Zoe, do you have another comment, or should I go to Einstein?
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to take too much of space. I just hope to get a bit more understanding of what I can imagine as a constitution. And so with values in it, I see the issue that the larger the group, the more difficult it becomes to decide on details and stuff. And I think that something like, which value do we pick now, or something like, is trust now a value that we want to put in or something? Or I mean, nobody's against honesty, but do we need this in the constitution? Well, stuff like that. I feel like that will be super whoa. And I mean, yeah, a constitution is for me very abstract, and I there see a little problem with taking then a constitution and the constitutional committee as a kind of already pillar of how we think about this stuff. So it becomes kind of a necessity because we thought about everything with assuming that it will be there, when it might be super tricky or maybe even impossible. Yeah, now I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Zoe. And Einstein, please go ahead.
Some great thoughts there. So Zoe brings up this topic about values. I think we can all agree that some values are universal, some are more regional, shared by a few groups, and some are shared by the few. This brings me to the point that was briefly mentioned, like value discovery. I think currently it was so easier before. When 5 years ago, when we rallied against the coronavirus, we were like 200 people and we shared values and could come together. Now it's quite fragmented. It's many different groups. I'm worried that we will need some form of shared platform so we'll be able to do all of these organically grown groups. And I think that's one of the key things. The other things I want to bring out, because Zoe said, is it more than values? Traditionally, I'm a legal as well. I have a master's degree in law. Like traditionally, it's also been used as a framework to make further the decision process in sub-laws. And this is because you cannot possibly hope to put everything in a constitution. What you put there is like the framework for everything else. So really, I think values, common goals and ideals, all of these things are things we need to think about if it should be put in a constitution and what this framework should consist of.
Yeah, thank you, Einstein. Let's have Ken and Rocky go, and then I'll close the meeting.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Ken.
Okay. One thing that you think of when you think of a constitution is human rights, and in relationship to Cardano, the rights of an individual who is using the system. And I just wanted to bring up one idea of maybe a right that people would want on Cardano is the right to opt out of something. And so, like, if you have a constitution and if some way it's controlling how the process of changing things in the system takes place, there's different categories of things that you're going to want to look at. You have things that people will be able to opt out of, and you have things that maybe it will control the way that anyone uses the system. And so, and I don't think that category is very large, the things that people would not be able to opt out of. Like, because when you do the hard fork combinator, you have the previous versions of the blockchain available. So like it's something to consider. What are people not able to opt out of?
Very good. That's a great point, Ken. Thank you. And Rocky?
I just wanted to briefly, because my memory was a little bit jogged there when Einstein was speaking, and also Zoe's comments around values. that was actually the framework that we did, and he said framework as well. So you know, just I'll second what he was saying, that you know, we did start with values as sort of the framework to work around. So we, you know, we established the values that we wanted to develop the document around. I also think that it's a good goal to keep it manageable, right, and legible, so that average anybody cares to read it or observe it. Otherwise, it's almost going to be pointless. And you'll just have to always explain yourself what it is versus showing somebody. We did have a point of keeping it to 1 page, right? So like having you know a book worth of, you know, it's just not going to work for people.
Those kind of constraints are important, and that gets to that principle. And I see shrimp. What do we call it? I'm not getting the name right, but someone else was commenting on this. Is that keeping things simple is a very important principle, in part because that forces you to make sure you have a generalized model. And when things get too complex, part of what's happening is you're kind of overfitting to particular parts of a system or a community. And as soon as something changes, the model doesn't work anymore. So that's a great principle to be reminded of. Steve, do you have any closing thoughts?
I was just going to say, should we start closing up? Should we start recording so people can, has anybody got any final comments they want recorded? If not, I'll stop the recording.
Okay, super.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.